But now first, a Bloomberg exclusive. Ethan Harris, former chief economist at Lehman Brothers, joins us in his very first interview since taking over as head of North America economics at Bank of America Securities-Merrill Lynch Research. Bloomberg's economics editor Kathleen Hays joins us now with Mr. Harris to discuss his outlook for the economy and his thoughts on the Fed. Kathleen?
Mark, thank you so much. And Ethan, welcome. It's really great to have you for your first interview in this new job, and congratulations on the new job, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there's a lot of fans out there cheering right now.
I'm sure there are. I want to quickly reference a couple of things that Secretary Geithner has been talking about. One of them is that we have moved from the crisis mode into recovery, although this recovery will be due for more than the normal amount of ups and downs. You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the economy faces massive headwinds with problems in the financial sector, problems for consumer balance sheets, state and local governments. I mean, there are lots of headwinds. But I agree that we are in a sustained recovery now. We've had a massive policy response. I think it's working. We are a long way from recovery in the sense that the normal person thinks of it. Full recovery in the U.S. economy means getting the unemployment rate back down to 6% or so. That's a long way off.
And yet you said you're not so worried about a double-dip recession, and you think that the jobs growth could be reasonable coming out of the recession, not the kind of real tepid thing a lot of people are forecasting.
Yeah, I think that forecasters are still kind of hedging their view a bit here. Obviously, the economics profession didn't look too good during the downturn. We seem to be too optimistic all the time. But, you know, we're in a cyclical recovery now. There are a lot of self-reinforcing forces at play. It's a global recovery. We're seeing each country in the world looking a little better. That's self-reinforcing. The capital markets are doing better. The economy's doing better. Those tend to be self-reinforcing. And, of course, we have a very active monetary and fiscal policy. And I think policymakers understand that they need to keep their both feet planted on the accelerator if they're going to make sure we don't get a double dip. So I don't believe in the double dip. I think we're at the beginnings of a sustained recovery.
And you're a Wall Street guy who just got a new job, so that's obviously encouraging. You know, B of A is hiring and all. Tim Geithner, Ethan, also said there's greater urgency for global financial reform. Do you think there's enough urgency a year after the Lehman collapse, which you lived through, or do you think people have forgotten a little bit too soon what happened?
Well, the way I would put it is that I think that the Obama administration's got a very big agenda, and, you know, so financial reform is just one of many pieces of what they want to do. Clearly, we need financial reform. We need a more rational system that controls risk better without destroying innovation. So, you know, there needs to be reform. As with health care, it's really, you know, there's no choice. There has to be some improvement in the way we regulate the financial sector.
Okay, we're going to have more in a moment with Bank of America's Ethan Harris. I'm going to toss it back over for Mark Crumpton. We've got some more important news going on here.
Kathleen, Mr. Harris, thanks. Now for more of our exclusive interview with Ethan Harris of Bank of America Securities-Merrill Lynch. He's joined by our economics editor, Kathleen Hays. Kathleen?
Mark, thank you so much. And Ethan, I want to look back now. A year ago, you were just living through the collapse of Lehman Brothers. You were the chief economist. Just tell us, I mean, with a year later, and now you're in this great new job, but looking back, what that was like and what it's like now to have experienced it.
Well, I think for everyone, this was like almost like the sinking of the Titanic or something, a very painful experience for everyone in the markets, every investor, in a sense that kind of the world was spinning a little bit out of control. And, you know, I think that there was a point there where there was a legitimate worry that the financial crisis could turn into some kind of a depression. But I do think that finally in November we got the kind of policy response, the beginning of the policy response that's now getting us out of this mess.
You know, it's interesting, Ethan, that you mentioned that, because I was just at a lunch with Rick Mishkin, former Fed governor, Columbia University professor, getting an award from the New York Association of Business Economics. He said that actually in February and March he thought that we could have slipped into another depression, but aggressive Fed policy saved us. You mentioned we're on track with the economy. But what about the financial crisis itself? Where are we in that cycle? Are the banks really ready to be completely off life support?
Well, one thing to remember is that when you get these big credit or stock market crises, the crisis in the capital markets lasts longer than the crisis in the economy. So in other words, if you look back on history, when there's a collapse in credit, usually the economy starts to pick up well before credit availability improves. On average, a year or two before credit availability improves, you get the beginnings of a slow, painful recovery. Then eventually, credit growth comes back, starts to reinforce the recovery, and you get a real recovery in growth. But it's not true that we have to get a recovery in credit first. The IMF has done a number of studies showing that credit usually lags recoveries during these credit crises.
But, you know, one of my colleagues in Washington, Craig Torres, points out to me that one of the reasons we set such a wide range of forecasts on GDP is that people are very concerned about bank behavior and bank credit creation, because the question is how scared and damaged the banking system is now. Right. Again, you say credit can lag, but is the damage over? Are we really healed?
No, I don't think we're healed by any stretch of the imagination, and the loan losses will continue for some time after the recovery in the economy. But again, I don't think that prevents some kind of recovery from taking place, as we've had many sectors of the economy that have, in a sense, overshot to the downside. There's room for a pickup in inventories, a pickup in housing, a pickup in durable goods consumption. We can get a business cycle recovery without strong bank lending. We also have to keep in mind that the Fed, in a sense, is acting as a substitute for the damaged parts of the capital markets with all their aggressive credit lending programs. And they will keep those in place as long as they're needed to substitute for private sector lending. But again, over time, there's going to be an ongoing healing process, better economy, less loan losses, banks become more engaged. This kind of feedback process will take a while to gather momentum, but I think we're at the beginnings of it.
Commercial real estate, though, still seems to be in a downtrend. Now, it's a lagging indicator, I guess you could say. The damage is done and it's going to continue. But how much does that restrain your view of the economy? Does the commercial real estate sector need some more special help from policymakers?
Well, I think there's no question that there are some sectors of the economy that are going to do poorly well into the recovery, and commercial real estate's probably at the top of the list. Another good example is state and local governments, which face very tough conditions. And that's why most economists have a pretty mild recovery in mind. Remember, when we come out of a big recession, normally you get a big pop in growth, 6-7% growth in the first year. We're looking for half of that in our forecast. Other forecasters have a somewhat weaker forecast going forward. But that's because of those sectors. It's because we think we're only about 2/3 of the way through the construction recession on the non-residential side, because we think state and local governments are going to be very tight going forward, and because the labor market hasn't picked up yet. I think that it's very important that in the next 3 to 6 months we see the job market stabilize here. So it's going to be a tough slog, no question about it.
Ethan, I'm quickly grabbing my notes to remember. I know your growth forecast, I think, in the first 6 quarters of recovery, you're looking for something like 3.75%. That's not super strong, as you said, by historical standards, stronger than the consensus. Do you have a bigger downside risk to that forecast or a bigger upside risk?
Well, I think it's a balanced risk. I mean, one of the things that's changed right now in the outlook is we've gone from an environment where there were massive downside risks in the outlook, no question about it. Most economists had a deep recession, but also couldn't rule out a depression-like scenario. We're in a more balanced environment. Okay. I think that policymakers have gotten this under control. So I think there are balanced risks around that forecast.
How about inflation deflation? Where do you tilt on that one?
I frankly don't get the inflation story. If you look historically at business cycles, inflation falls at the beginning of the recovery. Now, why is that? It's because there's all this spare capacity. There's high unemployment. Businesses are underutilized. There's a very competitive pricing environment in the first couple of years of recoveries. Even with all the liquidity in the system, banks are being conservative in their lending. So we just don't have a mechanism in the next couple of years for being concerned about inflation. I think other than commodity price pickup, we're likely to see inflation continue to drop. And do we get deflation? I don't think so. But are we going to get inflation? I think that's very unlikely.
Okay. Well, Ethan Harris, I hope that one thing we will get is you back on Bloomberg News with us. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it very much. Mark, going to send it back over to you.
Kathleen, thank you very much.